changing the sheets, always disconnect the cord from the machine. Don't be a hero.
Hi, Dave Friedman, Hardwood Floor Finishing 101. In this video, we're going to look at how to operate a Clarke Super 7 edger. We'll look at how to select the proper grit for your job, disc preparation, the room layout for machining, and safe operating practices of using a Clarke Super 7 edger. So stick around and we'll show you how to do it.
This is an edger disc cutter, so if you do this for a living like I do, you probably already own one of these. If you're just renting from your local tool supplier, you can buy the discs pre-cut for the machine, but because I do it so often, I just find it's more economical for me to buy the roll of paper and I pound them out with this. So I'll show you how to do that. So the key point you have to remember when you're using this is always pound the center first, because that's going to lock and locate the paper for you to do the perimeter. Now, over time, what happens is this is just like a shearing blade, and you pound it out with the rubber mallet. So over time, this tends to dull out. It'll cut paper for quite a period of time, and you'll have to replace this. But yeah, I guess every couple of years I replace this cutting band, because there is a slight taper on. If you look at it carefully, you can't really zoom in here, but there is a slight taper where it goes up, so it's almost like a blade. So you've got to be careful handling this, because you could potentially cut yourself. But once you get using it, you kind of just get into a groove and a habit of how to do it, and it works pretty well.
So you obviously want to locate an area where you're not on the floor, a nice flat surface area where you can pound these out. So when you are pounding these out, you got to make sure that the paper side is down towards the blade and your abrasive is facing up. I usually like to extend this out to get it flat. So I buy these rolls because I use this very often, so I just buy the roll of the 60 grit, and I also have these rolls in the 36 and 100 grit, so it all depends on where we're at in the sanding stage or what the floor requires will determine what grit I'm going to use. So that's an important point. The grit we're going to start with is determined by a few factors here. What's on the floor, what is the surface finish, the type of wood. Generally, a lot of the time I can edger everything with a 60 grit to start, and then we always go up to the 100 grit after. But there are times when I have to drop it down lower, like to a 36, or even I've even done it 24 grit, but I really try to stay away from doing those coarser grits because it's just more work, and you have to get all those coarser grit lines out before you can do any further work. So on this particular job, we're going to start with the 60 grit, and then we're going to go to the 100 grit. For these sheets, I'm going to pound out some 60s. So you make sure the surface of your disc is completely covered by the paper. And we're going to pound out the center first. Now what I like to do is I like to lock my hand here as I pound out the center. Usually get that in one pop. So this is what it looks like. I've pounded out the center. Now we're going to do the perimeter. Now when I do start the perimeter, this is where the roll is. I like to actually start pounding it around here and go around this way. I just find that it's more secure here, and then as I come around here, it's still holding on to the the firm side of the paper, right? So I have to start here and go counterclockwise. Lift the scrap off, and there's your disc. Now you can see here where some of the abrasives actually been cut off. So, sometimes you don't get an absolute perfect disc, but that is what I end up with. And with the center, we're going to relief cut the center here, so it sits flat on the edger. I just relief cut the center with a knife. And you can go about 1/4 inch to 3/8. You can even go up to, I'd say, half. You just don't want to go too deep. And we have to do this so as we screw this down to the edger body, it doesn't buckle and crease the paper as we're cutting. That's why we relief cut. So when you buy these pre-cut, these are already in there. But since we're pounding out our own, we have to put them in.
So when you're edging, you want to go clockwise around the room. So when you're planning your layout, always think of that. So this room here, I'm going to start here and go around this way. And that section we're going to do later. Then I'm going to come around here and I'm just going to complete this dining area. Now if you've ever owned one of these machines, you're familiar with this. What will happen over a period of time is this hole here will get filled up with the abrasive. And you'll try to screw down the locking nut to hold the paper, and you'll bottom out your locking nut, and the paper will just still be sliding around. And it won't lock, and you'll be saying, why? Well, the reason is, this hole gets filled up with the abrasive, and it just gets stuck in there. So you have to periodically just take, what I do is I just take a nail, clean it out. Well, probably every 3 or 4 months. It's just a, you could do it every week just to make sure it doesn't build up. Because if that builds up in there, and you're wondering why the paper won't lock, that's why. There's no secret to it. Clean out the hole. Okay, so I wanted to point something out about this rubber here. So you have to make sure that you're careful when you're cutting. These, I've replaced these before. This actually comes apart. You just unlock from these 2 holes, and you can replace these. These are about $150 to replace. So you got to be careful. You don't want your rubber on the perimeter here. You don't want to be going into any nails or screws or anything like that on the floor. So make sure your floor is clean, obviously, when you're doing any edger work. And then, that way you can ensure a longer life of your pad here, because, it's just annoying to have to replace these things that, if you do hit any nails, you can break this corner down, and that's really the effectiveness, that's limiting the effectiveness of your machine. So if that part of the machine gets broken down, when you go to edger, you're not getting a firm backing to your paper, so it's actually mushrooming over, and you don't get a sharp, clean corner. You want to really protect your edger pad there. Don't damage it. Make sure all nails are stapled when you prior to edger. Check your perimeter of your room, and if you're good to go, then rock it out. Just to make sure that's clear. Now another thing I like to do, you can put these directly on the pad. That's not a problem. But a lot of times you can load up. If you're doing a large area, you can load up 5 or 6 of these on there and just start pulling them off as you go. Now, I don't like doing that, but I will put one old sheet on there first, and then I'll put the new one on top, right? That's the way I like to do it. And just, again, it's all added protection to the rubber. So, a lot of times going over those is where you have issues. So when you're just starting out, or if you're just renting an edger for the first time, likely you're going to rip your papers here. So that's another good thing. If you have a backup sheet, like an older backup sheet underneath your cutting sheet, then you'll rip that, but you won't damage the surface of your rubber. Again, it's all prolonging the life of the rubber backing. You don't want to damage it. All right. I'll try to show you this with one hand, so I'm going to just locate that. You can finger start this. Just hand start the nut that's holding the paper. Now all of these edgers come with an edger key that goes in the back here after you've used it. If for some reason you lose this, or the edger you're using, or you don't have one of these, it'll take a 9/16 wrench. A 9/16 wrench it'll take if you lose it. So when you're edgering, one of the most important things is cord control. So you always want the cord, your power cord, to be opposite of where you're edgering. So I'll actually move the cord around as I'm edgering. This whole section here, I can leave the cord where it is. When I get up to about here, I'm going to put the cord from over there. Simple, but you want to totally avoid being anywhere near your cord. Okay, another very important point, make sure before you plug this in
Make sure this switch is off. That's the most important thing you have to remember when you're running this edger. Another point I'd like to make is over time these switches actually go. They get filled with dust and the contact it's no longer effective. Either way, this would be on. That's very dangerous. So just be aware of that in time these switches go. They only cost about 10 bucks to replace. I replace them periodically. You pop these two screws out, and there's a couple of screws that hold the switch into the machine. So a couple of wires that it's connected to. It's a very simple replacement, but just be careful when you are, just be aware that these switches eventually go and either pole is on. So it's very dangerous. Just be aware of that. Point to remember when you're edgering is that you always want to be moving the edger. You can slightly tilt up sometimes. When you have a pre-finished floor like this, the finish is often, the install of the planks has a lot to do with how it's going to affect your edgering. So when the planks aren't installed, if the quality of the wood isn't the greatest and they haven't milled the tongues and the grooves perfectly in line, then, and also warpage, when you get into planks that are, out of line, then you're taking one down to reach the level of the lower one. So it becomes a little trickier to edger, and you'll find that when you're edgering. But in general, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're always moving the edger and don't dwell in one spot, because you can easily grind too much down. And although it is correctable, it just makes your work a lot more difficult. So these are things you got to consider. I always go on the side of less removal, try to remove less material and go that way. So refinishing floors, all we're trying to do is take that surface finish off. We don't have to sculpt the floor down. As soon as that surface finishes off and the stain and it's cleaned down to the bare wood, then you can move on. So if we're sculpting the wood down and creating pits and dips and gouges, that's not a good thing for the overall look of the floor. So always caution on the side of less removal rather than more removal, right? That's another good thing with using the 60 grit. You're not going to hog as much material. If I had a 36 on there, I'd really have to be careful. And it's almost to the point where when you're using this machine, you're actually lifting up a bit. You're not pushing down at all. You don't need to put any downward force on the machine, because the machine's going to hog a lot of material. So you don't have to push down, you don't have to hog it. You actually want to pull up a little bit, and only in situations where you have to get the material off, then you might let the weight of the machine cut. Another thing you do too, you can lift up a little bit here, just lifting up a little bit on the back, just when you're trying to get areas like this. You're trying to clean up areas like this where I was saying the plank levels. If this plank is higher than this material is not going to come down as easy, right? So you're going to have to work this area a little bit more, but you want to go slowly, right? Be patient with it, take your time, and the end result will be better, because later on when you have to do removal of the edger lines, because you can't stain the floor now just the way it is. We have to then remove these edger lines later. You can't just stain the floor like this. You're going to see all circular lines. So, but anyway, just be careful when you're using the machine. Remember, caution on the side of lifting up rather than pushing down and putting force on it, and your edger job will look good.
want to point out, you notice when I start edgering, I don't have the edger abrasive sitting on the floor, ever. So you're lifting off, you turn the machine on, then you glide into the cut. Because if you try to start it with the edger down on the floor, it's going to pull you, and it's not safe. So these are just a very basic thing. I know it's common sense, but I just want to point it out. Make sure the cutting surface is not on